one thing that I noticed, even last, like, I think 20 years ago, I remember noticing, like, wow, my mom and dad, they like sit and they hold hands together, and they touch each other all the time. And there's this kind of like intimate connection and constant, just a desire to be close to each other, and an appreciation of each other. Hi, Dad.
Howdy, Paul.
Nice to have you on here. I believe this is the first time that you are starring on YouTube. Is that right? All the things your sons get you to do in the world?
Well, I suppose in one sense, but I've done a lot of speaking, and a lot of those have been recorded and they're on YouTube.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're actually a fairly, yeah. Okay, yeah. My apologies. Well, first time on Manifesto's YouTube channel, at least then.
Yeah, and the very first time for an actual interview.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so thanks, Dad, for offering or agreeing to step up here. It was me that asked, because we're having a conversation in Manifesto around sexual mastery. And in that conversation, we have seen two elements coming out that seem to be really important. The first one is the value of mentoring, as in having older, more experienced men in your life who've been through some of the challenges that you're facing and have mastered them, have found their way through, have found, achieved the goals that you're setting out to achieve.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing in a lot of those, the men who've done that well, what do those men look like in their lives today? Well, a lot of them are married. If you just look kind of statistically at it, then married men they earn far more money. They have better health. They have been more successful in their career. They have a lot more sex than unmarried men as well. They're a lot less lonely. There'll be far less lifestyle diseases. Alcohol and drug abuse and depression and loneliness, all that kind of stuff is far less prevalent amongst men who are married. So it seems like it's a really good deal, but it's also something that I think for a lot of young men today, all the stories that they have and all the input that they get is like, oh yeah, marriage is like old fashioned and doesn't really work anymore, and you need to go do something else. And so I thought, well, where should I start this conversation? And given like marriage and mentorship, and we often talk about like, your dad and getting encouraged to that. So, well, that would be great, because there are actually a couple of things around marriage that we haven't spoken about before.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe do you want to tell us a little bit? Yeah, I mean, you're married for 45 years to Mom.
Yeah.
Right. We were trying to remember, was it now 76 or 77? We have to ask Mom which year it was that you got married. That's what the ladies are good about. Yeah, and what I'm hoping we can dive into is try unlock some of the secrets of a good marriage. It's such a cliche, right? But it is secrets, isn't it? I don't know. Wouldn't you say so?
Yeah, secrets, keys to, fit in locks that can unlock them, open up. So kind of secrets, but it's also practical, down to earth stuff. Just find the right key.
Yeah. It's so funny because when I'm 41 years old today, when I left home 18 years old and moved off to London, then I thought, I'm going to do everything so different from my parents. And as I start getting into my middle age, I just see so many things that when things really fall into place and start working in my life, it's not like I'm copying everything that you guys have done, obviously, but there's just so many similarities that it's amazing. And so there's a real value in that. And so I was thinking, Dad, would you mind starting off by telling us, how did you first, a little bit like, how was your life when you first met Mom? And can you just describe what it was like, if you can remember the first time you saw her? Where was that, and what happened?
Oh, that'll be quite a story. I lived in the Johannesburg area for many years, and Grandpa came up to Johannesburg to come and do a series of talks. And I was so keen and interested and taken by those that I chatted to the guys in Joburg to see whether I could go down to Durban, because that's where Grandpa was from. And
Grandpa was he had founded a church, right? He was quite a well-known.
He was a well-known Bible teacher in South Africa.
Yeah.
And he came to do a series of talks in Joburg, where I was. So eventually got arranged. I was able to go down, and the weekend that I kind of arrived down in Durban, there was a conference down the coast. and I went along to this conference, and that's where I saw Mom for the first time. Didn't particularly bang, but it was just, oh, there's a nice looking lady, and had a little chat and so on. And then Grandpa asked me to come and see about getting some work, and I walked into the office. He was a builder and building contractor, and there was a possibility of maybe getting some work. And Mom came to the front desk very pointedly to come and check out this young man who was sitting there. I actually noticed it very specifically. Her and the secretary were very good friends. And so the secretary that was sitting at the front desk, I saw this little quiet conversation on the phone, and then suddenly Mom appeared. I thought, oh, okay. That was a little notice to say, here's a young man, come and have a look. So I ended up working in the office, in the builder's office. And 1 year during the break, Christmas break, South Africa always has a break building wise over the Christmas period. I went back home to my parents in Johannesburg. Mom went away on holiday with her parents to the Drakensberg. And one day it was raining in Johannesburg, and I was bored, and I thought, oh, what shall I do? I feel like writing to someone. So I wrote her a letter, and I got a response. I think she was shocked to get the letter. I was shocked to get the response. And then when I got back to work in the January and I walked into the office and I saw her, I was just bowled over. So I've got to get to know this girl better, and I think this girl is going to be my wife. And I don't know if you want me to go into the rest of the story, but that's kind of bang where it happened.
Yeah, well, let's see if we can get back to that one. I just want to, one thing that you guys have often told me about is that you arrived down in Durban there on your motorbike.
Yes.
What I don't know. Can you tell a little bit, like how do you think that was? Were you a bit of like the bad guy, Dad? Like, not when I say bad guy, like, were you the rough guy kind of thing, or what is that? What was in that?
Well, the Durban people were very conservative and very prim and proper. And I'd just done some studying, and I'd not given too much attention to my personal, what would you say, appearance, grooming. So my hair was fairly long, and I've got very thick hair. So when my hair gets long, it looks like a bush. And so I arrived on this motorbike with everybody thinking I was wearing this leather jacket, which wasn't actually true, but that was how it was perceived. And I'm on this bike and I've got this big mop of hair. So I was really seen as a bit of a rebel, an outsider. And I've always been someone who's a bit opinionated, I suppose. Always been a little bit on the stubborn side. So don't just conform for the sake of conforming. I needed to know what it was about. So yeah, I stood out as this weird guy from Joburg, and people that come from Joburg were considered as being a different breed. Today we talk about the Johannesburg area as the gangster province, so maybe I was seen as one of those gangsters. Although, I wasn't particularly into gangs and things of that nature. I was a fairly normal guy, but I was just looking a bit with my leather jacket and my long hair.
And you've grown up with you were just a group of brothers, right, who were running around and getting up to what South African boys did as a group of boys together.
Yeah, I had two older brothers, and yes, we went camping and hiking and running, and rugby was the big thing, and didn't care too much about what we looked like.
Yeah. So, and then I think it's interesting as well. So Grandpa, and this is one of the lacks in my life, is I never really got to know Grandpa very well because he died when I was around 12 years old, right? But
yeah,
he seemed to take a liking to you very quickly. And I wonder, so Grandpa had been a very, very high level, elite level rugby player and a very successful man. You call him a builder, but like he owned like a very large and very successful building company, right? And was contracting for the government and building hospitals and schools and stuff like that as well. And I guess, what do you think he saw? Because obviously he liked you when he met you. So he kind of saw through this rough exterior, I guess, right?
Yeah. Because he was a preacher and I was a young man having a desire to participate in preaching and to share the word of God with as many people as I could, he saw that as a very positive thing in me, that I wasn't there because I wanted a girl. I wasn't there because I wanted to get rich. I wasn't there because I wanted to, make a kind of a big thing of my career or whatever the case might be. I was focused kind of on the same thing that he was focused on, and willing to do whatever work was necessary to get along the way. And I think he saw that fairly soon after me arriving in Durban.
Yeah. And that makes me think, so like in Manifesto, one of the things we really struggle sometimes with guys is we work a lot on creating a personal vision as the foundation for what it is that you're trying to do out in the world. And we try and encourage men to make that personal vision not about like their own personal and especially material kind of gains, but something bigger. And it sounds like maybe, I think that would help us to get a bit of perspective, Dad, on who you are as a man. What is it that gave you that drive, that passion, that put, like sharing with people about the Bible as the most central thing in your life already at an age of, were you 20 at this time or?
Younger, 18, 19.
18, 19, yeah. What would you give us that background story as well?
Well, I grew up in a nominal church situation where, going to church on Sunday was the thing that we did, and it was brought up in a kind of I wouldn't say strict, but in a, church-going environment. And when my mother died, when I was about 12, 14 years old, 14, my mother died, and that kind of shook my world a bit. So I then asked some serious questions. Where am I going? What am I here for? What am I doing? What's this all about? What's this church going thing about? Ticking boxes and, sort of getting along. And yet there was a bit of a hole inside. So I came to a point, 17 years old, where I had a very real experience that transformed my life completely. People talk about it as an epiphany, talk about it as a revelation, talk about it. So I came to this point of saying there's more to this than what I've read or heard. And different circumstances led me to a point where I just made a very personal commitment to Jesus Christ in my life, and that transformed me totally. And from there onwards, there was this, I can't explain how or why, but there was this passion, this desire to now share this wonderful experience and this newness of life and this vision and this understanding that I come into, that there's more to life than just what's in this world. There's something deeper. There's something more fulfilling. There's an energy and a power that's available that man can tap into. And I just wanted to share that with everybody. So that was the beginning of it.
Yeah, great. Okay, good. Yeah, well, hopefully, I think that gives a bit of that starting point. Well, so what you walk into the office and Mom comes up to the front desk there. You meet her there, and you feel like, wow, okay, this woman's something special.
Not that first time, the second time.
This is after you have the job for some time. You send her the letter, of course. Yeah. The second time you come back. Yeah. So where does the story go from there?
She ran a mile. She said no.
So you told her, or how did you kind of what did you say to her? Or
well,
you just indicated, or
I showed a little bit more interest and made more conversations, and she picked it up very soon. And apparently this has happened previously. I was told afterwards. Every young man that showed an interest in her, she then withdrew. And to cut a long story short, one day there was someone in the church where she was. We were in two separate places. And in the church where she was, somebody spoke about a threefold cord is not easily broken. It comes from the book of Ecclesiastes. How can one be warm alone? But if two are together, then they have heat. And a threefold cord is not easily broken. And in that general statement to encourage the believers, there was just a witness in her own heart that said the statement was, seek the fellowship of your brother. And in that, the thought that just registered in her heart was, that brother is Tony. And the next Monday at work, I got a little note that explained what had happened over the weekend. And from there, our courtship just blossomed and bloomed, and I would say within a year, we'd made plans to be married. That was the culmination of this whole thing.
Sounds like it was almost like that was her having a little epiphany.
Her having a little bit of an
as well,
epiphany.
a revelation of
Yes.
like, oh, there's something about this guy, and this
Yeah.
can work. So there was, which is fascinating, because one of the most central things that I've really found in marriage, and I'll bring this up already now, and I use this illustration very often, is that what I found, I got remarried now at the age of, what was I, 39, I think. I'm 41 today. And so maybe even 38, I guess, is that for me and my wife, we had reached a point we were so used to being by ourselves, and we're so much like formed our personalities. So as two people trying to approach each other, it was just not possible, actually. We could do it in a superficial way sometimes, but if we really, at trying to attain intimacy is, being unified with another human being, it actually was beyond our abilities. And the more that I tried, often, the more actually we started hitting our heads and butting into things, and not even being able to understand each other, no matter how much we tried to do it. And so what I realized is, and there's this idea. So when you find something higher and bigger than yourself, you call that love. If you can, even better, call that God. And you orientate towards that. And then if you're able to move in that direction, then you naturally become closer to each other. Yeah. But coming at each other this way, it just doesn't work. It's too difficult. It's beyond our ability as human beings. We have this thing like, oh, love is beautiful and wonderful and it's great. But actually, no, love is the most difficult thing in existence, right? And so we have to have a source to get love from somehow.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah, and maybe one didn't mention this, but what was clear was that I was looking for a woman who had a similar passion to what I had, a similar desire, a similar conviction, a similar understanding of things. Mm-hmm. And there were many young ladies I met along the way, and I don't know how or why, but there was just a clear understanding in my heart, not that one. Mm-hmm. And with Mom, there was this resonance. We were heading in the same direction, planning for the same things. As you said, we were going that way together. And because we were going that way together, we were able to meet each other.
Yeah. And I imagine that must have made you much more attractive to a lot of women as well, that you had standards and you knew what you were looking for, right? That's a very attractive feature for a man, because there's so many men today, we meet guys, you're on Manifesto Core as well. So we have guys coming in there who's just like, my goal for this quarter is I have to find a girlfriend. And, it's like yes. Something with like, 2 breasts and, not terrible. It's like, unfortunately, it seems like there's so many men that are just like desperate for female attention and approval. And it actually makes them, it makes their mission incredibly difficult, because there's this neediness about them, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, when you're journeying towards the same direction, it's far easier to meet and to blend together.
Yeah. So it's not easy to find that. Mm-hmm. Okay, so yeah, I mean, we don't need to go into a lot more detail, but yeah, from there it became clear that you guys were going to you were, things naturally fell in with each other. I don't think I've asked you explicitly, Dad, but the photo of you with Mom at your wedding, I don't think I can imagine you looking happier than you look at that picture. You look like you just like won the lottery and become the president of America and being the king of the world or something like that.
Yeah.
What was that like when you did that?
I suppose the word is fantastic. It was this wonderful realization that I'd found this woman who was going to be with me for the rest of my life and support me, and we were going to go on this journey together. And there was just a fulfillment. And obviously, as a young man, you've got a huge sex drive, and you realize that here's a channel that's going to provide for this to be fulfilled, and bring that energy into focus and to build a family. I was the happiest man on earth, I think, at the time. Yeah. So if where do we take the story from there? What's the important threads? Do you want to guide us through it? I don't know exactly where. Now
I'm a couple of years from coming into the picture yet, right? But what do you want to continue the story from your wedding?
Well, from there, we went on a missionary endeavor, actually, Mom and I together, and I became her father, her mother, her brother, her counselor, her everything, because we were so far away, about 8,000 miles away, that communication wasn't easy in those days. You couldn't just do what we're doing now. It just wasn't available. So only means of communication was a phone call once in a blue moon, and letter writing. So what it meant is it really brought us, in a sense, into a circumstance where we were totally dependent on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, we really blended and helped and strengthened and saw each other through a difficult period. For a young woman to be, married and not able to communicate with her mum was quite a difficult time for mum. I was a little bit more of a loner guy, so I was more able to manage that. But what it meant is I became, mum's confidant, and I think that was helpful and beneficial. But we went through some, lonely times, difficult times. We were in England, actually, and seeking to establish a church there, and it wasn't easy or straightforward. But after a year, we got going, got the church going, things were developing, built a community together.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of Mum's friends had a baby.
Mm-hmm.
That stirred up all the maternal instincts.
Mm-hmm.
And they thought, okay, now this is going to be our turn.
Mm-hmm. There's two things I wanted to grab onto just from what you said there. So I often hear this word about codependency, where people feel that they've kind of developed a unhealthy form of attachment. And the way I understand it, I don't know what, or the way I understand it is like that you kind of like, you do stuff for the other person with a kind of implicit expectation that they're going to do something for you. And then you get upset with them if they don't do it or something like that. And so I don't know, I think some people now, when they hear any kind of dependency between a couple, they think, oh, that's unhealthy. Oh, we shouldn't do that. We need to be independent and strong and not connected. But you're having a pretty opposite perspective on that. I don't know. Have you heard that word codependency, and what do you think about that?
Well, I have, and I would see it as a completely different understanding.
Are you and Mum codependent? Would you call? I don't know. Does that make?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much so. We're very much dependent on each other and appreciate one another and appreciate our working together and our differences, because we are different. And we don't see that as conflicting. We see that as complementary. And we've, just always supported each other in our different stages of life, because, life has some curved balls and some trials, some difficulties. And we've just seen that we're dependent on one another. Yeah. And dependent is maybe a strong word, but, so it's not that you're so dependent on the other person that you cannot survive, but you're working together. We're in a partnership. Mm-hmm. So as much as you're in a partnership dependent on your partner, let's say, for example, you've got a guy who's a salesman and you've got a guy who's an engineer, and they, form a company together. That they're dependent on each other doing their bit. So the engineering guy does his bit, the sales guy does his bit, and the company thrives. So many engineering companies fail because the engineer doesn't have someone who can look after the finances. So, marriage is this partnership where you do things together and you're dependent on each other.
Yeah, I'm thinking reliant in some ways is like you rely on each other, you trust each other. Yes. And then I guess, so I suppose like the issue could be something like, well, then there are perhaps areas of your own self that you don't, or your character that you don't develop because you just rely on the other people to take care of that aspect. And so you could use it as a crutch that keeps you in a more immature state or something like that.
It could, but if you and your partner are really working together, then you actually develop that aspect of your personality rather than abandon it. Mm-hmm. So instead of you then just letting go and say, okay, well, that's the other person's responsibility, that's my wife's responsibility, you actually grow in developing that part in yourself, because a true a husband and wife relationship isn't, this is my domain and that's your domain. We're in this together. We're not two trains going in the same direction on different rails. We're actually looking to be together, getting this train to where it needs to go. And so you learn from the other person, their skills and abilities, and you begin to apply them. Not that you then take over that role, because that's not who you are. You remain who you are, but you expand your understanding and ability, and you complement each other.
Yeah. So I guess for you guys, it's never really been an issue as in trying to figure out, like I think in modern couples, there's been this necessity, especially in like Scandinavia or something like that, to kind of say like, what's your role? What's my role? What's we have to be equal. We have to share all the roles or something like that. Has that ever, I guess that's been a natural thing for you guys, or what?
Very much so. Yes. Very much of a natural thing. I don't think we've ever specifically sat down and discussed it and said, that's your part, that's my part. I've stepped into what I believe is my part. Mum stepped into what she's believed is her part. And then we've maybe, steered each other a little bit, said, but yeah, it's never been a fact of, oh, this is mine, that's yours, that we've had to thrash it out. We just naturally fitted into it. I suppose it's got to do with background and upbringing and culture and all that kind of stuff. Because you're in a system, and you kind of naturally adopt that system, if you like. And I don't think we ever sat down and specifically questioned it or challenged it or whatever the case might be. But you chat about it and you adjust as you go along. So I think my relationship with my wife was quite different to what my father's relationship was with his wife, and the people of our day. So we grew and we adjust, but we naturally fit
how do you think
you
and Mom differ from Opa and
well, for starters, they had very different faiths, and that was already a division factor between the two of them. And we certainly didn't. Opa was very much a farming man when he first got married, so there was this application of him running the farm, and my mum maybe managing the finances. Then when we came into the city, again, he was very much the how can I put it, the working man. He ran two jobs. He was forever working. Mom was more the managing, caring side of the family. For us, I felt that we overlapped much more than what they did.
Okay, so there has been you could actually agree that the strong separate roles of masculine and feminine in families has actually been softened up, and for you guys, that sounds like it's been a very positive thing, that
yes,
there's been a greater integration and overlap and connection in.
Yeah, and it's never been because the one made the other one feel guilty about it. It's always just been an understanding of, we're in this together and we're going to do this together.
Yeah. So I mean, sorry,
it's got to do with a biblical principle. The principle really is, a man lays down his life for his wife in loving her. A woman submits to her husband and loving him. And so this loving relationship says, you're taking responsibility here. I'm participating in that. And in other areas where there's maybe, that's, you don't have to ask me, can you put on the blue shirt today or something like that? So we're very much individuals, but we're understanding this role of supporting each other.
Yeah. So this is the central Christian principle, which I think is repeated a couple of times, but it comes especially from Paul. Am I right?
Yeah.
That the woman, the role of the woman in a good relationship is to submit to her husband, and then the man is to love his wife as Christ loved the church. Yes. And maybe you just want to so what's your thought? I don't know. I guess you've discussed that often, should men never submit, and should women never, shouldn't they love as well? Why separate those two things out from each other?
I think the thought is that a man tends to want to dominate and rule and reign. And the Christian way of ruling is a willingness to serve. So a man lays down his life in serving, but he's the head of the home and
you can actually
responsibility.
You can then actually do the ruling and reigning and dominating in the same way that, you know, Christ is, he dominated the Roman Empire by taking it over, by laying down his life, you know, giving his life to Pontius Pilate. He
not with swinging a sword and saying, I will conquer you.
Yeah.
But in laying down his life, there's then a willing participation in saying, recognizing a place that you hold, and that has authority to it.
Yeah. Actually, the ultimate authority, as that loving, and maybe it's the difficult thing for men to do sometimes as well. We're good at you know, kind of at least stepping into hierarchical relationships, I would say, because I also see a lot of men who it's easy for them to dominate. It's also very easy for men to submit and to just, like, you know, duck their heads. And you see many men who don't take responsibility. It's a way out of taking responsibility as well. So they kind of like say, oh, my wife is much more dominating than I am, so I'm just going to like do everything that she says, and I'm just going to look after my stuff. And they see things going wrong in the wrong direction, but they actually just they decide like, oh, well, it's not my, you know, that's her fault then, or something like that, right? So
yeah, as you say, it's capitulating. It's stepping back from responsibility.
Yeah. So it's not like men never, you know, obviously men need to listen to their wives and take very seriously the input that they get. And if the wife sees something that he doesn't, then he should, you know, be very careful about it. But there's this thing about taking responsibility for the overall direction. And I'd say especially the spiritual direction of the family, which somehow men, it's just, it is a natural role that men have. And there are many different ways of looking at that. I think that, you know, from a Christian perspective, it's quite obvious, you know, Christ, the incarnation of God, was a man, and priests have always been men. And so there's something about them, you know, and when you look at any hierarchical relationship, you talk about, like, you know, the masculine is that which provides for and looks after and you know, protects, and the feminine is that which which you know, kind of offers up to and submits and
nurtures and feeds and nourishes.
So
it's this thought that we often talk about, you know, prophet, priest, and king. So that kind of responsibility.
Prophet, priest, and king. Can you say a little bit words about all three of those?
So kind of prophet is the visionary thing, you know, seeing where we're going and taking the vision. The priest is the intercessor, the mediator, the reconciler. The king is the ruler, and the king who rules well cares for his subjects. He doesn't beat them with a rod of iron. That kind of principle.
Yeah. Okay. So then mom started getting a little broody. you were saying.
Yes.
What did your guys' marriage look like before you had kids, and what changed with having children?
Wow. Yeah, no, things change very dramatically when children come into the picture. We were very much involved in, you know, say, getting a church going and getting things moving. So we shared that very much, and most of our activity was involved in communicating, sharing, talking, getting people in, having people in our home, and that was fairly easily done. Once children come along, then that has to adjust. You just don't have the time and the energy to do all that stuff anymore. So we still did a lot of it, but it had to be it toned down considerably once children were born. And Mark was firstborn, and we were back in South Africa when he was born. You came along a year and a half later, and we were still quite involved in our church work and so on. So it wasn't that now was put on hold because we had children. We you know, because we had our children, they became part of what we were still busy with. But there's adjustment because you know, when you're breastfeeding and there's, you know, late nights, early mornings, children get sick, all sorts of things happen, then you adjust. And so our activities, if you like, were lessened. I wouldn't say they dropped to a degree where there was nothing. It's just that your activity lessens because you're taking responsibility.
Yeah. I'm curious about, so when Emmanuel was born, then I noticed that there's this very, very strong and natural bond between a mother and the child. And it's not automatic that the father is a part of that in such a strong way. Or actually, no, I actually say it's natural that the father in some way, in many ways, is excluded from that. Just, you know, the whole breastfeeding, and the mother plays such a big role in getting the child to sleep in the beginning and stuff like that. And so I think maybe this was a bigger issue for us being older and being individualists to a greater degree. But I really noticed that I had to actively intervene to remind Laura and create structures in our routine as a family that ensured that the central, you know, kind of point of our family and the organizing principle was our marriage, as opposed to it being the bond between Laura and Emmanuel, with, you know, dad kind of in the orbits. Like what I said to her is like, it's like Emmanuel's going to grow up and he's going to go off in the world. He's going to do kind of stuff, and it's going to be us left. And so we got to make sure that we're, and you know, what's going to also give him the best possible starting point for going out and doing that. It's going to be a very strong bond between his mom and his dad. And so we need to stand together more than, you know, in the worst cases, then Laura obviously has a lot more empathy and compassion and all of that kinds of stuff for Emmanuel. And my role is a little bit more to create some boundaries. And so it could very quickly, if we're not careful, I could see that it could have gone towards some kind of like, you know, mom and child against dad in a lot of situations, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, did that dynamic happen with you guys at all? Or were there other challenges, specific challenges that came along when you're having children that you had to work with?
Mom was of that persuasion, so there was no there was no conflict there. Dad, you've got to be involved. You've got to be part of this. I'm going to be there. I'm going to take my part. You take your part, and so together I think we navigated that very well. I don't think there was any thought of me being in the orbit as you speak about it. So the structure was there for me to sort of apply, and the loving and caring was shared, I think, amongst us. So that wasn't a difficulty for us at all. We just sailed straight into that one and carried each other through. So yeah, there was no.
Was there was there any, what would you say was it? You mentioned like the time challenges and just not being able to do the same stuff. Was that the biggest thing, or what we say was the most difficult thing about?
Not even difficult. It was just the need for an adjustment. Realizing that, you know, you can't just do everything that you did before. Children need things. Getting you guys into a routine, we felt was a very important thing. But realizing that, you know, a child is a child and needs to grow up and be a child and have space and you know, have fun and all that sort of thing. So then giving, you know, that takes time. Spending time with your children, going to the park, which you wouldn't possibly have done previously, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Okay. And then Dad, so what else would you highlight from, so now we've gone 40 years since I showed up, at least 41 years since I showed up. What have been specific learning aspects, and where would you go from if you're going to continue the story, given we have probably another 15 minutes or something like that before we have to bring this to a close?
Challenges that come along. You know, life has curveballs. Things change. Situations change. When, you know, you were a teenager, we were in Bloemfontein. I was under a tremendous amount of pressure to do work, to bring a company into a place of being established. And it was just very difficult. It sucked up an awful lot of time. And Mom was very supportive during that time. And so, you know, but it wasn't easy. That was a difficult period of time in my life. And then we moved back to Durban, and the work was easier. I was working not so much for myself. I can see I'm getting into the dark here because we've got load shedding.
Mm-hmm.
Shall I open something to give me a bit more light, or is it okay?
If you could, just give a bit more light on the situation. Oh, this is South Africa, where unfortunately the government hasn't planned very well on how to create enough electricity for the country, so all the lights get switched off once in a while. But I assume you have some kind of battery operating thing that we're still able to talk to each other.
Yes.
Yeah, that does look better. Great.
Mm-hmm. So then back to Durban, I was into a more regular work situation, and actually began to do fairly well, and so that pressure was relieved, and therefore we were able to. But by then you'd finished school, you were going to be heading off. Mark was already out of the home, so there was an adjustment period, and then when both of you guys were out of school, then you suddenly faced this empty nest syndrome. Mum and I were both working at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was a lot of energy that went into the working, and our relationship was fine. But then suddenly there's just the two of you, as you've said, the boys leave home and then there's just the two of you. And that then needs some adjustment and rethinking, reconsidering, reapplying oneself. And yeah, there was an important time for us to refocus and pull things together.
Yeah, what I was thinking about. So yeah, we lived 6 years in Bloemfontein, 5 years in Bloemfontein, maybe 5-6 years.
6.
And this is a town in the middle of the country where you were asked to go and help establish a church there. And you kind of told your boss, hey, I've been asked to go up to Bloemfontein. And so he kind of said to you, like, well, you can go do that, but you need to really be creating your own like financial background. So it sounds like you've got a bit of a tough deal from you continue to work as a freelancer for the same company, but for quite some time didn't get much payment for it. And I think that was a tough time for our family in many ways. And probably one can trace some of the difficulties that I've had in my life back to the fact that we were all under pressure in that time. And it was, of course, an important time for a young man establishing and finding his identity. And maybe one could say we didn't have the resources and the time to go off as a family together. And then I'd also couple that to say, like, there was such a good foundation laid earlier on in my life that, I needed to go out and do a whole lot of stuff in my young my life as a young man. But it's been really clear that coming back to that foundation has been a powerful and good thing. And I can really say, when you talk about that, Mom was very supportive of that time, and you had to work. Yeah, you worked a lot. You worked a lot those years. You were very, very much at work. You guys were focused on you knew what you were working towards. There was like a clarity of purpose in your lives in some way, which I think, which is what we described in the beginning. Your relationship really was something that was not about just yourselves and getting your needs met. But there was a higher goal to that. But it was starting to, I guess in some ways it started to take some strain. And then when we left, then you really had everything had been kind of organized around the kids as well, right?
I wouldn't say everything, but a big part. It was a big part of our lives was, bringing up children. It's a big part of one's life.
Yeah. So what
and the responsibilities that go with that, you got school fees to pay, you've got activities and all sorts of things to get involved in. So
getting married is a very large and important financial decision for a man. It's by far the biggest one he'll ever have to make. It's as if you're leading a family, it's a very, very big investment, and it shapes your life, this need for money. So we often talk about, like, and Paul kind of talks about, like, you don't need to get married. There's the life of the monk. You can dedicate your entire life to God. But you can, but for most people, majority of men today, I think it is the way forward.
And I would certainly recommend it for everyone.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we should just touch on that a little bit. I don't know. Did you have friends in school, or have you seen people who haven't done that? or have you seen clear patterns in life? Because how can you say that's for everybody? Isn't that just you generalizing from your own experience or something like that?
It probably is generalizing from my own experience, but my own experience has been so fulfilling that I can recommend it to everyone. Mm-hmm. So, and yes, there are friends that I know that have chosen to go in a different path, and some of them have been successful in that sense, and some of them have been successful but unhappy, unfulfilled. Mm-hmm. So in one sense, we were relatively poor, but we were a family together and we loved each other, and we had, I think there was a very good working thing in the family. And other people had great riches and were successful as far as I was concerned, but their families were in a mess, and there was hurt and heartache and breakups and terrible things happening, or there was no family.
Yeah. So
for me, that's a very fulfilling, engaging experience, learning experience. And yeah, can we say we did everything right? No, we can't. We made mistakes, as you say. Got so involved with trying to keep the family financially together that you neglect some other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
could have spent more time going camping and hiking and things like that, and just weren't able to do it. Mm-hmm. Couldn't afford it.
Yeah. These days, I found that I need to train a lot of marching. And so I'm taking Emmanuel up on my back, and we go out walking, and then we stop somewhere and we eat a couple of dates, and then we look out over the hills, and it's just fantastic. And but yeah, it's such a time stress sometimes to take that time out. But and I'm sure there'll be challenges coming. But I think that, as you, what really seems to me like what's held things together is that relationship between you and Mom. And I actually, when I first came up with this idea, I was talking to Alex Dibden, who is a mutual friend, yes. And he said he'd really like to hear that interview with Mom and Dad, because one thing he's noticed is that not only do you guys love each other and that you're there for each other, you're willing to sacrifice yourselves for each other, you're willing to give, and you've been together for 45 years, but it's actually very clear how much you like each other as well, isn't that? You really appreciate each other's company. And one thing that I noticed, even I think 20 years ago, I remember noticing wow, my mom and dad, they sit and they hold hands together, and they touch each other all the time. And there's this kind of intimate connection and constant just a desire to be close to each other, and an appreciation of each other, and that it comes to expression in just seeing you two together as well. So do you have an idea of what that, where that that's what Alex, at least we can do Alex a favor. What do you think is behind that? What's been the secret keys to that?
Just a realization of the value of this person who's in your life, and appreciating that, and just, I think, it's a mutual thing. So we say thank you to each other very often, and that then brings about this touching feeling, passing on, communicating, and it's not just with words. Because I suppose the older you get, maybe the less words you need. There's a sense of feeling. There's a sense of being one, and it's a tremendous feeling. Very fulfilling.
Almost sounds like the best thing a man could experience. So I mean,
I would certainly say so. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, so we started off, we said that because this is about sexual mastery, and so a lot of guys have a deep yearning in their life. And unfortunately, a lot of that has been channeled into pornography and masturbation and all kinds of other things, which directs that energy, that passion, that impulse towards a screen or towards oneself, and it's the most powerful force in existence, perhaps, in a man's life. Certainly as a young man, it's an incredibly powerful force.
Yes.
But to fully direct that into another person, that's something that I've just, these last 3.5 years, I've been discovering how much that means, to be able to make sure and create structures in my life, habits, structures, relationships, which is ensuring that all of my energy is putting that into one person, as opposed to allowing it to go in all kinds of other directions. And for me, it's meant maybe a bit more of an explosive relationship sometimes as well, because as I said, we've become a bit more individualist. And so
Yes.
Laura and I, we sometimes bump into each other a little bit more. Maybe you guys were younger and more malleable in creating that union as well. But I don't have any doubt in my mind at all that it's the right thing. That like by making sure that I channel that energy, and then I don't collapse into submission or run away or hide or go into isolation or something like that. And I also don't just, early on in our relationship, I tried that one. It's like, I'm the man, I decide about this thing. that just didn't work at all. Fell rather flat, unfortunately, certainly not.
Yeah.
So no, it needs to be through love.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's participation. So it's not demand, it's participation. And so, we're in this together. And again, we recognize we both got sexual drive. We both got sexual needs.
Mm-hmm.
If you can remember, Grandpa was a very driven man. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, Mom inherited a part of that. Mm-hmm. And that was a blessing for me, because I didn't have to go begging and asking mm-hmm. because there was this drive that just drove us together. And the fact that we could then channel that drive into, our sexual relationship and find that fulfilling, mm-hmm. then it meant that because that was in position and solid, all the other bits of doing work and applying oneself and, investing in the church and, fulfilling your gift ministry and giving was then so much easier to outwork, because this central sex drive was being fulfilled.
Yeah. So how does the sex drive transform over time? Can you tell us something about that? About how as you go through different phases in life, are there periods to it, and how it morphs and shapes and changes?
Yeah, and I don't think it's a formula that one can apply, because it's not the same for everyone, but it does change. You just because you're older, you don't have the energy that you used to have. So certainly our sexual involvement is less now than it was when we were 25, mm-hmm. But it's not any less fulfilling. Mm-hmm. So,
and it doesn't disappear, right? I think some people have this idea that like when you're 50, then you're finished and you got to do everything you need to do while you're 20 or something like that. Where I also hear from a lot of older men, like, well, it just gets much better. Like, the sex you're having it's like
because you also get to know your wife, and your wife gets to know you. So you're now together in going on to this journey. So it's not a matter of trying to still experiment and find out what are we comfortable with, what are we uncomfortable with. We now know what we're comfortable with, and so we can easily now participate and bring each other to orgasm without any difficulty. So that's I think a tremendous fulfillment.
Yeah, you don't have to be like stressed about reaching some kind of goal or something like that with each other, but
yes,
enjoying the journey just for being there with each other.
Yes, and you're now relaxed in the journey, so you're not striving to, particularly achieve something special or whatever the case might be. You're just on the journey, and you experience something special because you're in it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, good. So what do we say if maybe let's start that with so I'm 3 years into marriage. You follow a lot. We spent 6 weeks here the last 2 years being over visits. What would you say to me or to a young man who's maybe up in the years but decide like now he wants to make a commitment to a woman in creating a life together and reaching, maybe we're not going to get to 45 years, we might just make 45 years, you never know. But we're not going to get to 70 or something like that, that's for sure. Of years of marriage like you guys might, who knows how long. Do you have any thoughts that you want to, if we're going to wrap things up here?
I think one of the lessons maybe that you've seen is that there's a bit of adjustment required. And not that you're denying your masculinity or that you have to throw everything that you are out of the cot, but to realize you're coming together with a person, I think, as you've mentioned, who's had a certain amount of independence. And to now just ride roughshod over that independence is not going to help the situation. So to then be more flexible, I don't know if that's the right word, more understanding is perhaps the better word, of the fact that this other person is coming from a very different platform. Whereas Mom and I, we were in our 20s, we were basically on the same platform, we were young, and so we very much grew together. If you've grown separately, you need to understand that, accommodate that in your relationship, and talk about it. I think communication is one of the top priorities in any relationship and in a marriage relationship. So men, I think, tend to just bottle things up and keep quiet, and women then tend to overtalk because there's no communication coming from the other side. So communication, I think, is a very important aspect if two people are older and then enter into a marriage relationship.
I'll just add to say, like, as that kind of thing falls into place, it's amazing how other relationships in my life just become far easier as well. So it's clear, like, the problems in my character come to the surface in my marriage with Laura much more. And then as I'm able to, like, understand and have empathy and communicate and talk through things and meet her in a way that works well, then suddenly work relationships and, you know, wherever else that I am, things fall just almost like synchronistically and you know, I can almost say like supernaturally into place or something like that as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think
when that home relationship is right, it just outflows into every other relationship.
Yeah. It's almost like, and so I'll just touch a little bit on Christian theology again here as well. It's like, you know, when a marriage is in God, then it's a more than the individual person, the marriage relationship can plug into and receive the grace and the love from God, and then the natural response is that then flows out into the world, and so that's exactly what's happening. It's so clear.
Yes.
Well.
So again, it's that top down, that relationship's right. This one's wonderful with your wife, and then these are right with the rest of the world.
Yeah. Okay. So if we then just take the next case, so maybe this is less for me, but for young men who might be listening to this and be interested in this idea of sexual mastery over a lifetime in a holistic perspective of not just like, how am I going to get laid next weekend or something like that, but they actually realize that, okay, this is a powerful force and I want to be creating a good life, you know, for the rest of my life, instead of just like being focused on instantaneous gratification of pleasure right now. You know, but looking for a partner or something like that, where does one start with that kind of thing with the guy who's in that situation?
With looking for a partner or seeing something? Again, find something that you're interested and passionate about, and if you participate in that, the chances of you meeting someone who is of a like mind with like passions is very good. And then it's much easier to make the connection, instead of just saying, oh, you know, I just need a body that I can have sex with. Rather, I want a person who's going in the same direction as I am, and we can take this journey together. That's, to me, is a key perspective in finding a woman that's going to be a life partner, and then bring this incredible fulfillment sexually wise, so that they can be actually building something bigger and better and more fulfilling. Because I mean, sex is very, very fulfilling and very gratifying, and you know, all that, but it's part of who a man is. And if you just give yourself sexual satisfaction with just anybody, then the chances are there's going to be a huge emptiness in the real part of life of what you are. Whereas if you can bring those two together, that's first prize.
Yeah, so there's something about, and I don't know if this is going to be a big mouthful to bite off here at the end, but there's something about that when you find a person where there's a lot of unresolved issues between the two of you, then it can create, and it, like, especially like kind of this person is a very masculine, one of them is very masculine kind of thing, and the other person is very far away feminine, then it can create the very powerful attraction between each other.
Yes.
And that can create a very explosive and dynamic relationship and a very powerful relationship. And at some point, it'll lead to you having to deal with those deeper issues of what's actually underneath the surface in not just a physical way as well. And so doing that will be your life's work. and so you need to be, from the beginning, you need to be very aware of, when you said find something that you're passionate about, I think what you mean really is God. Find out what is God and how you can understand that. And if you can't handle the word God, then it needs to be the highest possible thing, that you possibly can imagine, that you could dedicate the rest of your life to, and
yes.
The best you possibly could come up with, that you could dedicate the rest of your life to, and attain something good, and then center your energy and your kind of your focus in life around that, and realize that unless your relationship also supports that, you're gonna just, it's not gonna go anywhere.
It's not going to go anywhere. And yeah, I mean, from me, my experience just tells me to find that relationship in God is the very best thing that you can do. And however you want to see that, obviously from a Christian perspective, we see a God who is the God of the universe, who sent Christ to die and who come to bring us into this relationship with him. And if that relationship is right and you're together in that relationship, to me, that's the strongest thing that there is. Others may have different perspectives on that, but yeah, for me, that's,
I mean, and in practice, Dad, I got to say, if you go into a church full of young women, full of beautiful young women who are very submissive, very feminine, and very, very receptive as well and looking for good men. There's this whole organization called YWAM, which I was involved in a little bit. It's called Youth with a Mission, but people jokingly refer to it as YWAM, so they call it Young Woman Awaiting Men, because that's kind of like this. There are some guys in there, but they get a lot of attention. And especially if you're a man who knows what he wants in life, isn't afraid of sharing with people who he is. And if you can find that perspective, that you can understand, like there's an underlying structure to reality, and that underlying structure to reality is drawing us upwards, and that's what God is basically. Then I think, like, why not go into a Christian church and talk with a woman about how does she understand God? She's probably also a bit confused about it, maybe more or less than you are. But I do think it's not a bad idea. And this is the first time I'm probably doing something like evangelizing on Manifesto's YouTube channel, but now that I have my dad here, it's got to be okay, right?
Yeah. And there's some lovely stories about men who found their wives at the well. So we always talk about go to the well, and there'll be a woman there that you can find.
Yeah. And the well is the place where you draw life-giving water, right? And so there's just so many layers of that, like, finding a woman as the life-giving water of life that refreshes and nourishes. And these stories about men.
Absolutely. So don't go looking in the desert. There where the well of living water is, that's where you draw.
Is it? Can you tell us the story of Rebecca, Dad? Maybe just to finish this off here, we finish this with a little Bible story. How about that?
So as a servant who gets sent back to the hometown of his dad to go and look for a wife for the son, and he gets to the well and he says, please, if someone comes out with a pitcher and offers water to my camels, then make that a confirmation that this is the wife that I must find for my master's son. And lo and behold, this girl comes out and he asks her for some water, and she says, well, let me draw some water for your camels as well, and draws the water for the camels, invites him into her home, houses him, stays the night, and he puts his proposal to the family. And the wonderful thing about it is, in those good old Eastern times, the family say, we will ask the girl And they ask the girl, and she says, "Yes, I will go."
Yeah. So this is the servant asking, and it's the servant of Jacob, right?
It's the servant of Jacob, coming now to ask for Isaac, his son.
Yeah, for his Isaac, his son,
and Rebecca goes and becomes the wife of Isaac. It's a beautiful. It's actually
and
Abraham's
it's also
son.
unique in like that they really love each other, right? Like there's a real. Isn't something like she runs to meet him or something when or I can't remember exactly, but yeah.
Well, he's out in the field when they arrive.
Yeah.
And she, gets off the camel, and in what they did in those days, they would cover themselves. And he meets her, goes to meet her, and then it just says he brings her into his mother's tent, and he's comforted. So it's just a lovely story.
Yeah, and quite different from many other relationships of that time, but a real central one for Okay. Good. Thank you, Dad, for that one. So yeah, appreciate it, and yeah, that's I think it's really. I'm happy that we got to share that. I don't know, what was that like for you? Like Christianity has been like a bone of contention between us for a long time. I was like, for 30 years, like anything but Christianity kind of thing. So.
Can I say the second most wonderful day of my life when things turned around? Yeah, but I think you've also said it's all through that time, we just kept loving you and caring for you, praying for you. And to see where you are now is just a tremendous. And there's a nice Afrikaans word, is a riem onder die hart. It's like a binding thing in the heart. So it's good to be able to have this conversation and know that, all that foundation has paid off in the end. Yeah,
it is something. It's about like, in a way, Christianity is seeing reality in a specific way, and you can't really understand it until you step into it. But when you step into it, then everything kind of falls into place in a way. And it's a little bit like stepping over a cliff, right? But then when you see other people who've stepped over the same cliff and you see them living in that way, it creates this sense of trust and understanding between you, because like, okay, well, we actually see reality in the same way. It's a powerful thing, right?
This world perspective just gives it a completely valuable and strengthening and upholding perspective.
And then to share that with the people that you're most intimate with, of course, is just an incredibly powerful thing as well, right? And so I've also met guys who, like, they find a woman, they think they have the same kind of religious understanding with each other, but it's not really quite there. And then they get married and they find out, no, actually we're, and
it falls apart.
Totally different directions. And it means that the place you're, whatever you see as, the fundamental nature of reality, that's going to determine how you grow and change and develop as a person. And so if you're not aligned on that with another human being and you marry them, you're going to be growing away from each other. It's inevitable, right? Or there'll at least be the deepest parts of your heart will never be able to be joined with this person. Whereas if there's a willingness to work on sharing and connecting that understanding and a foundation to connect it onto, then you can actually, I think that's the secret key, isn't it? Isn't that the secret key? Didn't we just nail it?
Yeah, that's the nailing it. It's building on a solid rock foundation, and then you build a good house. When the storms come, the house stands.
Yeah, and that's what I can find as well. It's like when I was able to, instead of being in a state of rebellion and rejection against the foundation that I grew up in and was created in and shaped and molded in, was able to reconnect to that, then everything else in my life could come into a state of peace and rest to be able to build further. Whereas, before that, I was kind of like, building on shifting sounds, really. Good. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
Lovely
very
to
much,
chat.
Dad. Really appreciate it. Yeah. And maybe it won't be the last time. We'll see how we go.
Yeah. We can have some more.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.